In the year 65 AD, a man sat in a bath in his Roman villa and waited to die. He had been ordered to take his own life by the Emperor Nero, a man he had tutored, advised and served for years. The charge was alleged involvement in a conspiracy. Whether he was actually guilty or not, we don't know. Nero didn't particularly care either way. The emperor had long resented his old teacher's reputation, his wealth, his moral authority. The conspiracy was merely a convenience. The man accepted his sentence without visible distress. He said farewell to his friends and urged them not to grieve. Grief, he had always taught, was a failure of judgment about what actually mattered. And he opened his veins. The blood came slowly. His body, weakened by years of illness and old age, refused to cooperate with the business of dying. He moved to a second basin. He drank hemlock. Still, his body persisted. Eventually, he was carried to a steam bath, and there, finally, quietly, he died. His name was Lucius Annaeus Seneca, philosopher, playwright, lawyer, political advisor, and one of the wealthiest men in the Roman Empire, and, by his own reckoning, a deeply imperfect student of Stoic philosophy, who spent his entire adult life trying, and often failing, to live up to the ideas that he wrote about with such brilliance. Of all the Stoics, he's the one I find most recognisably human, and I think that's exactly why you should read him. Welcome back to the Stoic Mind Mechanic. My name is Tim Howell. In the last episode, we followed Stoicism from Athens to Rome through the philosophical embassy of 155 BC, through Pernicius and the Scipionic Circle, through Cicero's Latin translations. We saw how a Greek philosophical tradition was adapted without being diluted into the governing philosophy of the most powerful empire in the Western world. Today we meet the first of the three great Roman Stoics, and in many ways the most accessible entry point into the tradition. Seneca isn't the most systematic, he isn't the most consistent, but he's the most honest, the most stylistically brilliant, and the one whose words hit a modern reader with the most immediate visceral force. We'll look at his life, his contradictions, his major works, and then we'll spend some time with the ideas I think are most urgently relevant to how we live now. Time, distraction, mortality, the courage it takes to look at your own life in a true and honest fashion. Seneca was born around 4 BC in Corduba, or present-day Cordoba in Spain, into a wealthy and well-connected family. His father, Seneca the Elder, was a distinguished rhetorician. His brother Gallio would become a Roman provincial governor, mentioned in passing in the Acts of the Apostles as the man who dismissed the charges brought against St. Paul in Corinth. The family moved in some serious circles. Seneca was brought to Rome as a child, studied philosophy and rhetoric, and showed extraordinary early promise, and by his 30s had established himself as one of the most compelling advocates and writers in the city. He was apparently so brilliant a speaker that the Emperor Caligula grew jealous and ordered his execution, only to be talked out of it by a court lady who convinced the emperor that Seneca was so ill he would die soon anyway, and it wasn't worth the trouble. That near miss gives you a flavour of the world in which Seneca navigated for his entire life. Imperial Rome was a place where proximity to power was simultaneously the source of everything: wealth, influence, security, and the most reliable path to destruction. Seneca understood this completely. He wrote about it constantly, and he was, despite everything, unable to stay away from it. In 41 AD, under Emperor Claudius, he was exiled to Corsica on charges of adultery with the emperor's niece, almost certainly a politically motivated accusation. He spent 8 years in the island. Then in 49 AD, he was recalled to Rome by Agrippina, Claudius's new wife, to serve as a tutor to her 12-year-old son. That son was Nero. For the first 5 years of Nero's reign, Seneca, alongside the general Burrus, effectively co-governed the Roman Empire. The period is remembered by historians as one of the more stable and relatively humane stretches of Nero's rule. Then Burrus died, and Seneca's influence waned. Nero's pathologies deepened, and Seneca, reading the situation with the clarity of a man who had spent a lifetime studying power, began trying to withdraw. He offered Nero back his entire fortune. He asked permission to retire from public life. Nero refused both, but allowed him to withdraw from court. Then came the conspiracy of 65 AD and the bath. It's a life of almost novelistic drama, and what makes it philosophically significant is that Seneca was writing constantly, brilliantly throughout all of it. Seneca's output was vast and remarkably varied. He wrote tragedies, dramatic plays that were enormously influential on Renaissance theatre, and that give us a Seneca of volcanic emotional intensity quite different from the measured essayist. He wrote scientific works, he wrote consolation essays for people in grief, and he wrote the two bodies of work that concern us most here. The first is the essays, sometimes called the dialogues, on the shortness of life, on tranquility of mind, on the constancy of the wise man, on anger, on clemency. These are sustained philosophical arguments addressed to specific individuals working through a single Stoic idea with depth and rhetorical force. They're the best introduction to Stoic thought for a modern reader who doesn't want to start with the more fragmentary ancient texts. The second, and to my mind the greatest, is the letters to his friend Lucilius. 124 letters written in the last 2 or 3 years of his life, addressed to his friend Gaius Lucilius, a provincial administrator about 20 years his junior. They're not really letters in the ordinary sense. They're sustained philosophical essays in epistolary form, but what makes them extraordinary is their texture. They're warm, digestive, self-critical, funny, and shot through with a sense of urgency that comes from a man who knows he's old, possibly in danger, and is trying to pass on everything he's learned before time runs out. They read like nothing else in ancient literature, and I'd argue like very little in modern literature either. I want to spend the heart of this episode on what I think are Seneca's 3 most urgent gifts to a modern reader. The first of these is his account of time. On the shortness of life opens with one of the most arresting sentences in philosophical literature. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a great deal of it. He goes on to argue that life isn't actually short. It's by any reasonable measure long enough to accomplish everything that genuinely matters. What makes it seem short is that we surrender it to distraction, to other people's agendas, to the endless deferral of the things we actually care about. We treat time as if it were inexhaustible, spending it on whatever is immediate and insistent, and then one day we turn around and find ourselves old and wonder where all that time went. Seneca was writing in 49 AD. He might as well have been describing a Tuesday afternoon in 2026. His remedy isn't a productivity system, it isn't a schedule or a habit tracker. It's a prior question. What do you actually want your life to be? Because until you can answer that question, you can't make meaningful choices about how to spend your time. And most of us, Seneca includes himself in this, spend our lives remarkably reluctant to answer that question. The second gift is the account of distraction and busyness. Seneca identified 2,000 years ago what we'd now recognise as the anxiety of constant availability. He wrote about the way we fill our days with noise and movement, not because it serves us, but because stillness and silence confronts us with questions we'd rather not face. He called this negotium, or busyness, and he saw it as one of the principal extremes of the examined life. He wrote to Lucilius in letter number 7, "Retire into yourself as much as you can, associate with those who will make a better man of you. Welcome those whom you yourself can improve. The process is mutual. Men learn while they teach. Retire into yourself. In a world of infinite external demand, the scroll, the notification, the meeting that could have been an email, that instruction carries the weight of necessity, not luxury. The third gift is the most personally demanding. Seneca was insistent, almost obsessive, about the practice of self-examination. He described his own nightly habit of reviewing the day, not to congratulate himself, but to prosecute himself. Where had he been weak? Where had he acted from habit rather than principle? And where had he allowed irritation, vanity, or laziness to take the wheel? He wrote about this with a candour that's genuinely unusual. He didn't pretend to be an exemplary Stoic. He described himself as someone still in the middle of the work, fallible, inconsistent, perpetually aspiring and perpetually falling short. In one of the most disarming passages in all his writing, in letter 6, he says simply, "I am not yet the kind of man I want to be. I shall never be satisfied with myself while I know that I have faults." This isn't the voice of a Stoic sage, serene and untouchable. It's the voice of a person genuinely in the struggle. And that, I think, is why Seneca endures when more formally perfect philosophers have faded. I said at the start that Seneca is a flawed Stoic. I want to be specific about what that means because it matters. Seneca was, at the time of his death, one of the wealthiest private individuals in the Roman Empire. Ancient sources suggest a fortune equivalent to what we might today call hundreds of millions. This from a man who wrote extensively and beautifully, compellingly, about the Stoic teaching that wealth is a preferred indifferent, and that the wise person holds it lightly, that it can't contribute to genuine flourishing. He served as the political advisor and enabler of Nero, a man whose reign descended into the murder of his own mother, the persecution of political opponents, and eventually the Great Fire of Rome. How much Seneca was complicit in, how much he tried to restrain, and at what point he simply looked away because looking was too costly. These are questions ancient and modern scholars have argued about for centuries, and there are no clean answers. He was aware of all of this. He wrote about it. In one of his essays, he addressed directly the charge that he lived in contradiction with his philosophy, and he offered a defense that I find both honest and insufficient at the same time. He said roughly, "I know I'm not the person I'm describing. I'm describing a direction of travel, not a destination that I've reached." Here's how I hold Seneca's contradictions for what it's worth. The hypocrisy charge, that he preached poverty while living in luxury, matters. It's not trivial. If Stoic philosophy is merely an aesthetic, a sophisticated way of feeling good about yourself without actually changing how you live, then it's worthless. Worse than worthless, because it gives a philosophical veneer to unchanged behaviour. But there is a difference between hypocrisy as complacency, using philosophy to feel absolved, and hypocrisy as the gap that every genuine moral aspiration creates. Seneca knew the gap was there. He named it, he examined it, and kept aspiring anyway. He didn't say, "I've achieved the Stoic ideal, therefore my wealth is fine." He said, "I'm still working, I'm not done, I may never be done." That gap between who we are and who we're trying to be is not a reason to dismiss the aspiration. It's the very terrain on which the philosophical life is lived. I want to close with a passage from the letters that I think about often. Seneca's writing to Lucius about the approach of old age. By this time he's in his 60s and aware of his body failing, aware that the time he has left is finite in a way it hadn't always felt. And he writes in letter 101, "Let us prepare our minds as if we had come to the very end of life. Let us postpone nothing. Let us balance life's books each day. The one who puts the finishing touches on their life each day is never short of time. let us postpone nothing. I don't think he means do everything urgently and immediately, in a blaze of productivity. I think he means something quieter and more demanding than that. He means stop treating your actual life, the life you want to be living, the person you intend to become, the conversations you've been meaning to have, as something that begins after some future threshold is crossed. It begins now. It only ever begins now. Seneca didn't always live by that, neither do I, neither in all probability do you, but the words are true regardless of who's saying them. And that's perhaps the most important thing Seneca teaches us about the relationship between a philosophy and the person who holds it. The truth of an idea is not contingent on the perfection of its advocate. Your reflection for this episode: where in your life are you postponing something that matters? Not a task, not a project, something that speaks to the kind of person that you want to be, a conversation you've been avoiding, a quality you've been meaning to cultivate, a way of spending your time that you keep deferring until things settle down. Things don't settle down. Seneca knew that better than almost anyone. The bath was always going to come. The only question was whether, by the time it did, had you actually lived. In our next episode, we'll stay with Seneca and go deeper into what is perhaps his greatest single essay on the shortness of life. We'll read it almost in full, section by section, and bring it into direct conversation with the way modern people experience time, distraction, and the quiet panic of a life that feels like it's slipping away. If you found today useful, that one will go further still. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. It's the best way to support the channel and help it reach people who might need it. Until then, keep calm, keep stoic, and I'll see you in the next one.